Welcome to the Irish Revolution. I've been avoiding talking about it for some time now, but the events of July 1920 make it impossible to ignore any longer. I try not to let my biases interfere with these videos, but in one case I've been unable to contain myself in the past, and I doubt I'll be able to do so in the future. I'm going to put it bluntly. Nobody in Sinn Féin or in the broader Republican movement had a coherent strategy when dealing with the North, except maybe Michael Collins, if I were feeling generous. Sinn Féin, on the surface, were totally opposed to partition and were not prepared to allow the northern counties to split off and form their own Belfast-dominated statelet. We tend to think backwards, as the later iteration of the Republican movement was almost totally concentrated on the north. But in this period, there was a kind of cognitive dissonance at play. The North was ignored very often, or even just written off in a lot of minds. One Sinn Féin TD, J.J. Walsh, even let it slip one time when he claimed that they had been striving for a republic in 3/4 of the country only. And this is understandable. Ulster was complicated. It had a Protestant majority who wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. There were ancient sectarian problems that were always at risk of sparking up again. And in some ways, Sinn Féin were less popular here among the Nationalist community. The IPP vote held up well where it collapsed everywhere else. Their fraternal organisation, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, was strong here and hostile to Sinn Féin. I struggle to find any serious Republican at this time who seems to have given much thought to the North at all. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. I'd like to get into it with somebody. Well, anyway. As Michael Hopkinson points out, there was a tacit understanding by the IRA that a physical force movement would not work well in the North due to the loyal majority, as well as a divided nationalist community, many of whom were still loyal to the old IPP. The presumably pro-IRA Catholic population were more geographically dispersed. Recruitment to the Volunteers IRA was lax in comparison to the rest of the country. In Belfast, for example, the two battalions barely got more than 1,000 recruits at any one time. Even where there was an organisation in place, the function was primarily defensive. Most of the casualties in the North came from rioting. Between July 1920 and the end of the year, 74 people were killed in violence in Belfast, an eerie premonition of the later Troubles. There were some isolated IRA attacks in what would become known as the Six Counties in the spring of 1920. In June, an RAC man would be killed in South Armagh. An attack on a police barracks in Cookstown, County Tyrone, would lead to the death of an IRA man. There were ongoing disturbances in Derry, of course, in May and June 1920. The root of the problem in Derry was the long-running Protestant fear of their jobs being supplanted by Catholic workers, perhaps with the added insult that while they had died in huge numbers in the First World War, the Catholics were inherently disloyal. Even if this isn't really true, plenty of Catholic Irish fought for Britain in the war, but bigotry doesn't care about your facts. The January local elections, despite being rigged in favour of Unionists, led to the election for the first time in 3 centuries of a Catholic mayor. The new mayor promptly revoked the freedom of the city to Lord French, the viceroy. There were clashes in the middle of June which led to the intervention from both the Ulster Volunteers, the Unionist militia, and the IRA, the Republican one. Loyalists led siege to St Columb's College. The British forces only intervened once the violence began to abate, and months later, violence in Belfast erupted. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with Unionist culture may not know this, but every 12th of July the Orange Order commemorates a battle. Apparently it was very important. Everyone familiar with Northern Ireland knows that the weeks leading up to this event can be very tense. During the Troubles, middle-class Catholics were known to scarper down on holidays for a while to get away from it. In 1920, tensions were particularly high, what with the War of Independence raging away throughout the country. Edward Carson, the leader of the Unionists, threw fuel on the fire with a speech warning of the Sinn Féin threat and promising that Unionists would take matters into their own hands, strongly hinting at internecine warfare. Even extremely pro-Unionist newspapers in London, such as The Times, condemned this speech. That's how provocative it was. Now, adding to this tension was a lingering suspicion that the Catholics were out to take Protestant jobs in the shipyards, like in Derry. Of course, this wasn't helped by the fact that the industry itself was in recession. I think I'm painting the picture here. The North was ready to explode. The straw that broke the camel's back was the assassination of Colonel Smith. You might remember him from the Listowel mutiny last month. He had urged mutinous RAC men to be even more brutal in confronting the IRA. On the 17th of July, he was shot in a country club by a small group of IRA men. Smith was a native of Banbridge, County Down. Railway men refused to transport Smith's remains up north, which made the already angry Unionists almost incandescent with rage. There were riots and expulsions of workers in Banbridge as well as Dromore. On 21st July, after returning from the 12th of July holidays, a meeting of Protestant workers in Workman Clark's shipyard in East Belfast led to the expulsion of Catholics and some, quote, rotten prods, unquote, presumably those Protestants who refused to take part in this orgy of sectarianism. And hey, those lads deserve honourable mention here. How brave it must have been to stand up to their own people like that. I'm not sure I would have had the courage for it. What started in Workman Clark's ended in Harland and Wolff, the great Belfast shipbuilders. The expulsion spread, and by the end of it, 7,000 Catholics and Labour activists lost their jobs. In the days following the expulsions, riots took place in all the familiar fault lines of Belfast. Some things never change. Newtown Ards Road, Short Strand, Shankill Falls, New Lodge, Old Park, etc. Michael Hopkinson, who I mentioned earlier, states boldly that were this to happen today, we would correctly refer to it as ethnic cleansing. I'll also jump ahead a month to August 1920. On 22nd August, D.I. Swansea was shot after leaving church in Lisburn, County Antrim. The Cork IRA were responsible. Swansea had been the DI in Cork at the time of the murder of Lord Mayor McCurtain in March and was held liable by the inquest jury. Swansea was moved to Lisburn, and Michael Collins himself was said to have ordered his execution in retaliation. Sean Culhane, one of the men who executed Colonel Smith, was also one of the men to shoot Swansea. It didn't take long for Lisburn to erupt. The returning IRA men could see the town go up in flames from the rail carriage as they headed back to Cork. The immediate consequences of this execution was the reprisal burning, I would even go so far as to say pogrom, of large parts of Catholic Lisburn. 3 days later, the reprisals and burnings would spread to Belfast. There would be more trouble in the north, up until the truth, but these were undoubtedly the worst months for it. I was going to get into the B specials and other aspects of the war in the north, but I'll cover that in a future episode. Just finishing up here, this month there were attacks on British forces in Cork, Tipperary, Kerry, Galway, Sligo and Mayo. Charlie Hurley's 3rd Cork Brigade of the IRA led a daring attack on a Coast Guard station in Hoe Strand, taking a large number of guns and ammunition. Hurley was one of the most successful IRA commanders of the war, greatly admired by that Cork folk legend Tom Barry, who we'll be hearing a lot about in the future. Thanks so much for watching, talk soon, good luck now, bye.